Nutrition science, industry influence. Follow the money. Understanding how diet influences health is a pressing need. By some estimates, a suboptimal diet is the single greatest changeable risk factor contributing to death and disability worldwide. And in the United States, the cost of diet-related chronic diseases are estimated to be as high as $1 trillion each year. Nutrition science has long suffered from a lack of government investments, with only about 5% of the NIH budget, or $1.8 billion, directed towards research on how the foods we eat affect our health. With so little government funding for nutrition science, who is funding the rest of the studies that feed the constant news cycle? Many are funded by food companies and industry groups, either to conduct studies in their own research divisions or in the form of grants given to university scientists. That's problematic because food companies and industry groups have an inherent bias or conflict of interest. Their primary goal is to promote their products and to sell more of them, not to advance knowledge of food and health. This affects how they frame research questions, design and interpret studies, and report their results. There's a long history of biased nutrition research influencing dietary advice. In the 1960s, the sugar industry paid well-respected academic scientists to publish research concluding that it was fat, not sugar, that was detrimental to heart health. But too much fat and too much sugar can negatively affect heart health, but it benefited the sugar industry to focus the blame on fat. When food companies drive the narrative coming out of nutrition research, this can potentially impact public policy. Media attention has made researchers and policymakers much more aware of the problems with industry funding and conflicts of interest in nutrition research, and they're working to solve them. But regardless, you can see reports of a study that show that blueberries can block bladder infections, pistachios can prevent pancreatitis, or cinnamon can cure cancer. Well, you should be skeptical and always check the funding source. Studies of a single type of food are almost always industry funded. So how do we find clarity in a complex field? Some key issues are that nutrition research is really difficult to do well. We want to know how nutrition relates to health over the long term, but it's hard to quantify how people eat over a lifetime and track them for long enough to see an impact. We often rely on observational studies, which can only show that two variables are correlated, not that one causes the other. Randomized controlled trials are rare, and they're often small, short-term studies that may or may not tell us what happens in the real world. Diet is exceptionally complex, with countless combinations of different nutrients and foods. One study is never enough to fully answer a question in the complex field of nutrition. Nutrition research is often funded by the food industry, which can be biased towards results that benefit business, not human health. All of this can be discouraging, but you should also know that researchers are working hard to improve the quality of nutrition research and to interpret it honestly for the rest of us. As a consumer of nutrition information, use a skeptical eye when you read news of the latest nutrition research. Look for areas of consensus where committees of experts have put their heads together to come up with the best advice they can based on the evidence we have, such as in the dietary guidelines for Americans. You'll find that while experts in this field are often debating the latest controversy, they also agree on a lot. As we continue on, we'll find how to find accurate sources of information and who you can trust for evidence-based advice in the field of nutrition. Finding accurate sources of nutrition information. As science is always evolving, sometimes slowly. One study is not enough to make a guideline or recommendation or to cure a disease. Science is a stepwise process that continuously builds on past evidence and develops towards a well-accepted consensus, although even that can be questioned as new evidence emerges. Unfortunately, the way scientific findings are communicated to the general public can sometimes be inaccurate or confusing. In today's world, where instant internet access is just a click away, it's easy to be overwhelmed or misled if you don't know where to go for reliable nutrition information. Therefore, it's important to know how to find accurate sources of nutrition information and how to interpret nutrition-related stories when you see them. Deciphering nutrition information. New study shows that margarine contributes to arterial plaque, or Asian study reveals that 2 cups of coffee per day can have detrimental effects on the nervous system. So how do you react when you read headlines like this? Do you boycott margarine or coffee? When reading nutrition-related claims, articles, websites, or advertisements, always remember that one study neither proves nor disproves anything. Readers who may be looking for answers to complex nutrition questions can quickly misconstrue such statements and be led down a path of misinformation, especially if the information is coming from a source that isn't credible. You can develop a discerning eye when reading news highlighting nutrition, science, and research. The scientific study under discussion should be published in a peer-reviewed journal. Having gone through the peer review process, these studies have been checked by other experts in the field to ensure that their methods and analysis were rigorous and appropriate. Peer-reviewed articles also include a review of previous research findings on the topic of study and examine how their current findings relate to, support, or are in contrast with previous research. Question studies that come from less trustworthy sources, such as non-peer-reviewed journals or websites, or that are not formally published. The report should disclose the methods used by the researchers. You should also identify the type of study and where it sits on the hierarchy of evidence. Keep in mind that a study in humans is likely more meaningful than one that's in vitro or in animals. An intervention study is usually more meaningful than an observational study, and systematic reviews and meta-analysis often give the best synthesis of the science to date. If it's an intervention study, check for some of the attributes of high-quality research already discussed: randomization, placebo control, and blinding. If it's missing any of those, what questions does that raise for you? Did the study last for 3 weeks or 3 years? Depending on the research question, studies that are short may not be long enough to establish a true relationship with the issues being examined. Were there 10 or 200 participants? If the study was conducted on only a few people, it's less likely that the results would be valid for a larger population. What did the participants actually do? It's important to know if the study included conditions that people rarely experienced, or if the conditions replicated real-life scenarios. Did the researchers observe the results themselves, or did they rely on self-reports from program participants? Self-reported data and results can be easily skewed by participants, either intentionally or by accident. The article should include details on the subjects or participants in the study. Did the study include humans or animals? If human, are there any traits, characteristics noted? You may realize you have more in common with certain study participants and can use that as a basis to gauge if the study applies to you. Statistical significance is not the same as real-world significance. A statistically significant result is likely to have not occurred by chance, but rather to be a real difference. However, this doesn't automatically mean that the difference is relative in the real world. Credible reports should disseminate new findings in the context of previous research. A single study on its own gives you very limited information, but if a body of literature supports a finding, it adds credibility to the study. When reading such news, ask yourself, is this making sense? Remember, if a headline professes a new remedy for a nutrition-related topic, it may well be a research-supported piece of news, but it could be a sensationalized story designed to catch the attention of an unsuspecting consumer.